Hello, everybody. What I wanted to talk to you about today is kind of the crux of what this channel is about, in that it has been a discovery of mine that over the last maybe 15, 20 years in death metal, that there's been a decreasing amount of actual artists within the genre. There's a lot of amazing players. There are a lot of virtuosic, amazing players. Some 15, 16-year-old kids that can play circles around me. The talent pool is more flooded than it's ever been. Everyone can play. The bar for what you need to do in death metal is so high now that really, if you want to get your feet wet in the death metal genre, you have to have an amount of skill that's really was unheard of maybe just 15 or so years ago. That being said, the reason behind that is because we have resources like YouTube now, where if you want to learn how to play the guitar, it's all right there. The only excuse you have for not obtaining the skill to play is whether or not you're devoting the time into it, and that's both a blessing and a curse, because what that is causing now is people to focus on the wrong things when they want to start playing an instrument. The first thing you should probably think about, or you don't even necessarily have to think about it, you have to feel it. You have to have a reason for wanting to play. You have to have an emotion or a thought in you that is compelling you to play, otherwise you're not going to feel functional. You're not going to feel whole. What YouTube is doing right now, it's presenting the technical death metal guitarist in a fashion where it's hard to resist wanting to get yourself to that level of playability. So the reasoning for wanting to play death metal has now been flipped. Before, you would utilize the techniques of your dexterity and your speed to get your message across in music. Now the vehicles to get a message across are the message themselves. That's something I said in another video, and it still rings very true. The concept of death is both very simple and complex at the same time. Everything dies. At the same time, every individual death has a ripple effect throughout the world, and that's where it gets complicated. So the death metal arrangement, the typical death metal arrangement, very simple, 2 guitars maybe, or 1 guitar, bass and drums, to get across a very simple sound. Where it gets complex is the melody you bring to the table and the arrangement you bring to the table. So it's really a perfect genre for the guitar. However, people that are trying to attempt to play death metal now aren't coming at it from an artist's desires. They're coming at it to try to join the cool kids at being able to play the fastest, the most technical, the most brutal. That is not how the mind of an artist works. And you can pinpoint a lot of that in what's going on in modern metal today. Because of that, because of what YouTube is doing, and because of what certain landmark releases have done, you have singular voices cohabitating singular subgenres. Like right now, if you hear the term tech death, you already know what it sounds like. And why is that? It's because there is a certain tonality that goes along with that. There are certain techniques you're going to hear within that genre. You're going to hear scales used as riffs. You're going to hear pretty much consistent 16th note patterns to try to get across the concept of motion. You're going to hear all of that interspersed with what is most likely very simple rhythms, because that is when the mask is lowered and the hand is shown that there really isn't a singular melodic voice behind a lot of these players, because they can't string a basic rhythm track together. They don't have their own tonalities because of being raised on YouTube videos or a constant digestion of bands that are Xeroxes of other bands that have come a long time ago. So while there are certain bands that are still trying to continue what the technical death metal sound of the 90s was, for the most part, it's been reduced to a spewing of scalar fragments and syncopated chug guitars, and that's where you can really tell that the end game of what technical death metal has been reached, and it's not going to go anywhere. It had all kinds of potential at the turn of the century, and then certain releases came out that really fucked it up. And one of the ones that is probably the guiltiest of this rather, is the first Necrophagist record. The second one is definitely more of a culprit, because that gained them the visibility that they currently have. The first record kind of came and went. It was on, I think, Morbid Records, very small label in Germany, and then it got re-released along with their second record. I had the first pressing forever ago, and I liked it for what it was. You know, it was a neoclassical take on death metal. The aggression was there in the vocals, the speed was there, and it seemed very sophisticated. At the same time, it was something that I recognized could be easily emulated with enough practice. And this first song on the first record that I'm about to play, I think demonstrates a lot of the issues that are currently plaguing technical death metal some 20 years later. I had previously said that scales and certain shapes repeated across fretboards do not belong in death metal, do not belong in a song, and I stand by that. And what you're going to see in this first track here is you're going to see a reliance on scalar sounds, and you don't have to know the scale to know what I'm talking about. If you're in your head and you can hear, you can kind of predict where the notes are going to land as it's being played, then you know that it's essentially a scale that has not been changed up in any fashion. There hasn't been any removal of notes, or no notes have been assigned any longer of a note length. They're all just straight 16th notes, and they're all in the up and down format in terms of pitch, or they'll have repeating up and down fluctuations within the riff itself. But either way, it'll resemble an exercise, because there isn't enough there that would designate a singular artistic voice. What you're hearing is the mathematical beginning and endings of natural scalar formats. And this first Necrophagist track really is going to demonstrate that throughout the course of the song. And you can really see how much influence this had on bands today, where if they can't come up with a melody to fill their song, they're going to go ahead and kind of stuff it with any kind of scalar things that they can, because on the surface it sounds technical. You know, it's very notey, it's busy. But when you break down what it is, you're essentially taking a structure that already exists, and you're more assembling a song. You're not composing a song. So what I want to get into is assembly versus composition. Assembly is you take pre-existing notions that reside in music. Music is mathematical. If you break it down, and I do not have a full knowledge of music theory by any stretch. I'm not a schooled musician, but I have enough of an ear after listening to metal for so long that I can pick up on patterns well enough where I know what is being copped here and there to formulate what constitutes a riff nowadays. What's going on here is way more in the assembly theme than it is in the composition theme, because you're taking blocks of preconceived notions, preconceived mathematical notions, and letting them format your structure instead of coming up with your own sense of melody and your own sense of tonality, your own sense of rhythm, your however you want to give importance to each note. You're not going to be seeing that in a lot of what I'm going to be showing you today. And like I said in previous videos, it does not matter if you like what's going on in these bands. I'm not going to get into whether or not I like what's going on in these bands, but I am going to pinpoint that what is happening here is not composition. It's assembly. It's essentially taking a box of IKEA furniture and putting it together based on a map that came out of the box. It's already ready to go. You just have to fit the pieces together, and then you have a song. Do it enough times, and then you have a record. And that's what happened at the turn of the century, and that kind of stuff didn't happen in death metal before then. So we're going to look at this first Necrophagist song, see what's going on in here, pinpoint where the crutches of scalar abuse are, and then we're going to look at some more recent examples to see how this had a rippling effect on the death metal genre and kind of worsened it as time went on. Second riff of the song, and you could see he's taking a shape that would constitute an exercise and just moving it around the neck, and the same kind of the same note values in terms of how long you hold each note are given to each part of the phrase as he's moving it around. So that's an exercise. That's assembly. That's not composition. This is something that you know if you're practicing guitar and you're kind of getting the technique down, it would be as if you were like, okay, I'm just going to throw that in a song. I don't have an idea of what I want to bring to the table. I don't have an emotion in me. I don't have the compulsion to write based on a feeling I have. What I have is I learned something and I want to get it recorded. That's what I'm getting across from something like this, and it continues as he plays. So you can see we're getting more of the same here, more of the same use of scales as riffs, scales as chunks of riffs, and then putting them together to try to get what is some kind of melodic movement happening. But at the same time, you're recognizing that there's no space between notes. There's no differentiation between length of notes. This is an exercise. This is not a riff. Back then, when it happened, there wasn't really too much of that happening, so this band was a novelty in terms of, it sounds like death metal vocally, but there's this neoclassical guitar stuff going on, and I don't think anyone thought it was going to shape the genre, so there wasn't any pitchforks being sharpened for it at the time, but it really did have an adverse effect on what was to come in metal. And I'm going to show some examples of that now. This next clip is from a band called Beyond Creation. They're one of the tech metal forefront bands currently, and you could hear a lot of the similarities that Necrophagist had in this band. And what I'm going to play here is a small segment where you can hear the use of scales to create the illusion of technicality and to fill in a space in a song where a actually well thought out melody could normally go, and you're going to notice that in between there is very little happening in the rhythm guitar, very little development, very little in the rhythmic dynamic of it. It's essentially a piecemeal affair just to tick all the right boxes. You have to have your rhythms that are going to get the crowds to move, and then you have to have your pseudo-tech scalar riffs afterwards just to make them think that you got something going on when there really isn't much there. So let's give this a listen. All right, so one big thing to take away from that is the terrible songwriting there. So they went from a very bouncy rhythmic part, very simple, to just ringing out forever so that they can get in position to do this scalar tapping thing. And you know, that sounds technical on a superficial level, but it's really not. It's essentially just a series of notes running up and down in a mathematical format that is already predetermined. And it goes on forever. And once again, scales are not riffs. Do not use scales to band-aid your songs together. There's no artistry in that. And then what did they go into after that? Something completely unrelated, completely different mood, no flow. So what purpose did it serve? You know, if you want to do something like that, you have to use it to build towards a climax. There was none of that here. But they needed to ham-fist it in there because that's the kind of band this is. Those are the sounds you need to have. And that's really unfortunate because it really paints you into a corner. You know, there's no artistry here. This is assembly. This is not composition. Here's probably the greatest offender of the style. This is Rings of Saturn, not a death metal band, technical deathcore band. They call themselves alien core, whatever kind of gimmicky bullshit they want to say to get people to listen. This is a band of known trolls. The main songwriter, Lucas Mann, has went on record saying he's the greatest technical death metal composer of his generation. I'm sure he said it just to incite hate. He thrives on it. But given the state of metal, that might unfortunately be true. It's really sad to admit it, but there isn't a whole lot of composing going on in this genre. And he is definitely taking the idea of assembly to the extreme. All of Rings of Saturn songs are essentially bits and pieces of scalar exercises chopped up and sequenced to resemble technical riffs underneath very simple rhythmic guitars that have very little melodic development. And it's done on purpose because you need to have that metalcore mosh part underneath, that breakdown, just to get kids to want to buy your shit. So we're going to listen to a segment from this song and see how much of it is scalar, how much of it is exercised, and how little of it is actually a riff. So aside from that being the dumbest bullshit ever recorded, you can really pinpoint how much it abuses the predetermined mathematical formulas of what scalar music is, and just staple pieces of it together to get what vaguely resembles a song arrangement together. You know, it's all straight 16th notes. It's essentially a guitar solo without any feel that is somehow shoehorned as a rhythm guitar. There's no relevance to there's no importance on any of the notes in any of that. There's no differentiation between the length of each note. It all happens very fast, and it's all scalar. And any kind of movement it has in terms of like tonality, it really is only on the most superficial of bases. It's essentially just showmanship amplified, and that's the band's gimmick. So I can't hate them for wanting that to be what is the foundation of their sound, but it is artistically bankrupt. There is nothing about that that tells me that if you took away all of Lucas Mann's gear and told him he could never play guitar again, that he would not be a functioning human being. And that's what artistry is. The artistry is the need to create and it making you a full person. And this is essentially him just trying to flex and gain appeal that way. And you can do that outside of music. He just happened to find a fan base stupid enough to not see through it. And it's really a shame, because this band is lampooning as a death metal band, and there's nothing about this that is death metal. There's nothing about this that has any kind of compositional relevance, no timeless value. This is all essentially this is meme metal, and that's kind of where the whole genre is right now. This last segment I want to show you guys is actually a tutorial on how Archspire constructs their riffs. This is Dean from Archspire. He's got a huge YouTube following, has a lot of influence on what technical death metal guitar players that are just kind of trying to get their feet wet are going to attempt to sound like. So you're going to hear that necrophagist abuse continuing in the future, simply because of people like him that have a huge YouTube presence that are kind of shaping the tonality and the structuring of what is parading as death metal right now in young people's ears. So in this video, he's going to admit a lot of the things that he does within his assembly. I'm not going to say composition, to try to formulate a structure when he doesn't have a voice of his own to do so on its own. So I'll just let him speak about how he constructs this part in this song, and we're going to dissect what he's saying afterwards.
So a diminished run kind of sounds like this. Now that sounds great, but you probably heard that a million times, and we don't want to just sit here and go, I mean, it is kind of cool. Maybe I do want to sit here and do that. But instead of just doing some basic stuff like that, up and down with our diminished shape, we're going to sequence it. Anytime you sequence a series of notes, you're going to play them out of order, or doubling some, or going back and ascending 4 notes, going back 3 notes, ascending 4 notes. So there's a bunch of different ways to sequence something like this. We're going to sequence it like this. No, we're not. Sorry, it's like this. So we're going to do 4 notes. Now this is a symmetrical scale, means all 4 of the notes inside of this riff are actually evenly spaced. They're all minor third apart. So that's what gives it such a dark, atonal kind of sound. Actually, the definition of atonal would be lacking a perfect fit. So we actually have a flat 5, this scary devil's note kind of thing, like outlawed or whatever, which is an interval I think that was actually like, you cannot play this interval back in classical music in Bach's time or whatever, but he did it anyway. It's pretty sweet. So these 4 notes. This is a tough one because the sequence, you might notice, I'm using hybrid picking, which means I'm actually using this finger as well. Sometimes I'll extend to the ring finger or the pinky finger of the right hand, but a lot of the time it's just to grab another note. So I'll slow it down. So see if you can grab that one. The next one, we actually do another tail too. Goes like this. So it's another sequence. It's a similar kind of sound. It's an octave up of the same kind of diminished shape. But we're going to need to do some two-way pick slanting. So remember what downward pick slanting is. The part of the pick that you hold slants downward like that. So we're actually going to go upward pick slanting as well. The whole point of downward and upward pick slanting can be explained if you check out some Troy Grady stuff. But the basics of it, you have to let your pick out of between two strings. So let's say if you have two strings, two adjacent strings, and you're doing a down pick on one and then an up pick on that same string, you need to have an escape route for your pick to go in order for you to play another string. So it's really dependent on the style or the type of riff you're doing. So here we have an economy picked section. It's really fast. You might notice that my right hand, after the one of the last notes, I do some slanting with my right hand. So that's really important. Seriously, go check out Troy Grady. It will totally change your entire guitar playing. So I'm going to play the riff one more time, and I'm actually going to slow it down so you can kind of get a better feel for it, but consult the tab if you get a chance.
Okay, so I'm going to let that go a little longer than I should, but it really is a good window into the mind of the current tech metal guitar player. If you notice a lot of what he had to say, it is rooted in the idea of technique first and composition second. He told us everything that he was doing with his technique, but nothing that he was doing in what motivated him to get those notes to be presented as they were. But he did say that a lot of what that was sequenced pre-existing scales. He showed you that diminished third run that he started at the beginning, saying that he liked it, but he wanted to change it up. You've probably heard it a million times. Deicide song "Repent to Die" is that same thing. A lot of the death metal in the '90s had that, but it didn't comprise a majority of the riffs. It was maybe used a little bit in a solo here or there, but he liked the sound of it, and he wanted to make it so that it resembled something you hadn't heard before, so he changed the order of the notes. So he still assembled it based on the pre-existing note pattern within it, but he kind of tried to make it so that it felt new to the listener. He's trying to dupe you into thinking that you're hearing a new experience when you're not. You're still hearing that mathematical representation of a cluster of notes that represents the tritone. The tritone interval is what makes up that diminished third run. And when you go up and down the strings, you're essentially going, you're still formulating the octave, so you're really not having much melodic development in it at all, even though it sounds very complicated. But he took that sequence of those notes and just used it to fill in gaps of his riff. And the positionings that he's doing here, they sound busy, but there isn't much happening within them. It's all just kind of clusters of notes around an octave, moved here and there. But if you were to apply a bass line to it, it would be a very simple, slow bass line that doesn't need to move around a lot. It's not going to resemble like a suffocation bass line. So it's essentially a lot of busy work to create the guise of technicality over what is essentially pretty bare bones riffing here. And if it wasn't for his knowledge of what some of that scalar stuff is, he wouldn't have been able to piece it together. And this is kind of, I think that now that he's lifting the curtain on that kind of songwriting, we're going to be seeing even more of this. And that's a shame, because it all does go back to some of that necrophages stuff. People heard that busy technicality, and they were able to ape the idea of it without actually coming up with some of the idiosyncrasies that they had. You can emulate the necrophagus sound by playing fast scalar music without having some of the subtext that made some of their music actually pithy. But what is happening here is a very watered down approach to that necrophagus style, and it's only going to continue as people like him gain more of a YouTube following and are steering the education of what death metal guitar is to people that are just trying to get their feet wet in guitar. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on in terms of the idea of assembly versus composition. All of these people here are the skill levels are through the roof. I'm never gonna talk shit on their playability. These guys can play circles around me. I never focused on what they are doing to become a well-rounded player. I found what I needed to get my message across as a composer, and I utilized those techniques and didn't feel the need to refine them, because the importance of the music that I am putting out is the message of the music, the emotion behind the music, not the vehicles of technicality and speed and brutality or whatever that normally can flesh out that message. And when he sits down to play guitar, I don't think he has anger in him to try to get a message across. I don't think he has a yearning. I don't think he has anything that would compel you to really make yourself feel whole as a person in an artistic product. I think he really is just sitting down and trying to come up with the most pseudo-technical music he can and have it have a bit of death metal edginess to it, either in the vocals, lyrics, imagery, just to give it enough of that allure to get people that are simple-minded to think that he has depth behind what he's doing. And that's really the crux of what is wrong in death metal nowadays. And you're just going to see it continue unless someone comes across in the YouTube genre and explains to modern audiences what is compelling them to write, and not compelling them to write based on technique alone. So what I would like to hear from him is a tutorial on how he gets the desire within him to compose, and how he gets pen to paper from there. Not the techniques he's using to validate the notations that he's doing, but what is driving him as a musician. I want to know what made him want to pick up the guitar in the first place. But we need to start righting the ship. We need to find out how to get the mystique of what death metal is back in the limelight, try to expose the reasoning behind creating any kind of music within the genre, and see if we can build up the substance of what the genre is, rather than all of the flourishes that are masking the emptiness that is being presented as music within the genre now. So if you have any ideas of any bands that are within this style that you think could represent a movement into the future in terms of providing more of a substantial layer, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure that there are bands that are as notey as this that actually have a unique voice to what they're saying. I haven't encountered many of them, but I would like to see the logical development of what was occurring in the 90s before it got bogged down by the arms race of technique and speed. So if it's out there, let me know. I would love to hear it, and I could discuss it in a video if you'd like, and try to pinpoint what makes it more substantial than some of the stuff we just listened. Thank you.